Let me ask you something. If you had to name the most innovative country in the world, what would you say? Maybe the United States, maybe Germany, maybe South Korea, and yes, those answers would make sense. These are countries known for technology, science, and massive industrial power. But what if I told you that none of them hold the top position? What if I told you there is a country surrounded by instability, located in a desert, constantly under geopolitical pressure, that invests more in innovation than all of them, and not just invests more, but actually gets better results? Because this country doesn't just innovate, it dominates. And the most shocking part is this: it wasn't always like this. In fact, just a few decades ago, it was on the edge of economic collapse. We are talking about Israel. Today, Israel is known as the Silicon Valley of the East, a country with one of the highest GDPs per capita in the world. A country that produces cutting-edge technology. A country that exports innovation, even in the middle of the desert. But this success story hides something deeper, because Israel didn't become rich by accident. It didn't become innovative because of luck. And it certainly didn't start from a position of strength. In fact, if you go back just a few decades, the picture looks completely different. Israel wasn't a model of success. It was a warning sign. During much of the 20th century, the Israeli economy was heavily interventionist. The government controlled large parts of the economy. Public spending was enormous. Markets were restricted. And the results were exactly what you would expect: low efficiency, weak growth, and a system that struggled to sustain itself. But the real shock came in the 1980s. Because what happened then pushed the country to the brink. Inflation didn't just rise, it exploded. Year after year, prices increased at absurd rates: 30%, 50%, 100%, and then something even more extreme. By 1984, inflation reached nearly 400%. Think about that for a second. Prices quadrupling in a single year. Savings disappearing almost overnight. Money losing its value so fast that people stopped trusting it completely. At that point, the economy was no longer stable. It was chaotic. And when trust in a currency disappears, everything else begins to collapse. Businesses can't plan. Consumers stop saving. Investors disappear. And the entire system becomes fragile. Israel was not becoming a technological powerhouse. It was becoming an economic disaster. So what changed? How did a country on the verge of collapse transform itself into one of the most innovative economies on the planet? The answer begins with a crisis and a decision that most countries never have the courage to make. Because in moments like that, governments usually do one of two things. They either double down on the same mistakes, or they completely change direction. Israel chose the second path, and it changed everything. The first step was brutally simple. Stop the bleeding. The government reduced spending massively. Public enterprises that were losing money were privatized. Salaries were frozen. Budgets were tightened. And most importantly, the money printing stopped. Because inflation doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from government spending more than they have, and trying to cover the difference by creating money. Once that cycle was broken, something remarkable happened. Stability began to return. But that alone wasn't enough. Because there was still a deeper problem: trust. After years of hyperinflation, people had stopped believing in their own currency. The Israeli shekel had lost credibility. People preferred to hold foreign currency. In fact, at one point, only a tiny fraction of bank deposits were in local currency. That tells you everything, because when citizens don't trust their own money, the system is already broken. So Israel did something radical. It removed control over money from politicians. The central bank became independent, no longer controlled by short-term political interests, no longer used as a tool for reckless spending. Its only mission was clear: maintain stability, control inflation, protect the value of the currency, and slowly, confidence returned. People began using the local currency again. Investments increased. Planning became possible. And the foundation of a real economy started to rebuild. But Israel didn't stop there. Because stability alone doesn't create wealth. You need something else. You need innovation. And here is where the real transformation begins. Because Israel realized something that many countries still fail to understand. Natural resources are not the most valuable asset. Ideas are. And if you don't have oil, if you don't have massive land, if you don't have strategic advantages, then you must build something else. You must build a system where ideas turn into value. And that is exactly what Israel did. At the beginning of the 1990s, the country faced a new problem. There were talented ingénieurs, gens scientistes, entrepreneurs. There was something missing: capital. Many promising projects never left the ground. Not because they were bad ideas, but because there was no funding, no support, no confidence. And without those things, innovation dies early. So the government came up with a strategy that would change everything, instead of trying to pick winners itself. Instead of creating inefficient public programs, it decided to partner with those who already knew how to invest. Private venture capital. This decision was crucial, because governments are notoriously bad at choosing successful projects. They waste money. They follow political interests. They invest in the wrong places. But venture capital funds, their survival depends on making the right bets. So Israel aligned incentives and created a system that attracted private investors from all over the world. This system became known as the Yozma program, and its structure was simple but powerful. For every investment fund that raised private capital, the government would co-invest, sharing the risk, but also sharing the potential reward. And here's the genius part. If the investment succeeded, private investors could buy out the government's share at a favorable price, which meant they had a strong incentive to succeed. Because success meant full ownership, this created a massive influx of capital. Not just local money, but international money. Suddenly, Israel wasn't just funding its own innovation. It was attracting global investors, people who were willing to take risks, to fund startups, to build companies from scratch. And that changed the entire ecosystem. Because once capital flows, ideas start moving. Startups begin to grow. Networks form, talent attracts more talent, and innovation accelerates. Over time, this created something rare. A self-sustaining innovation machine. Thousands of startups emerged. Technological breakthroughs became more frequent, and entire industries began to form. Israel didn't just create companies. It created an environment. One where risk was accepted, where failure wasn't punished, and where success could scale rapidly. But even that wasn't enough, because innovation doesn't happen in isolation. It requires infrastructure, education, talent. So Israel invested heavily in all of these areas. Universities were strengthened, research centers were expanded, and one of the most strategic moves was attracting skilled immigrants, people with knowledge, with experience, with technical expertise. This influx of talent accelerated everything. Because innovation is not just about money. It's about people. And when you bring the right people together, with the right incentives, in the right environment, something powerful happens. You get exponential growth. And that is exactly what Israel achieved. Today, the country has one of the highest numbers of startups per capita in the world. Thousands of companies operating at the cutting edge of technology, from cybersecurity to biotechnology to artificial intelligence. And perhaps even more impressive, this success didn't come from massive government spending. It came from strategic spending, smart spending, spending that leveraged private capital instead of replacing it. In fact, one of the most surprising aspects of this model is that many of these programs ended up costing very little in the long run, because successful investments returned money back to the system, creating a cycle, a loop of reinvestment and growth. And that is the key difference. Because many countries spend billions on innovation and see little return. They build programs, create institutions, fund projects without incentives. Without alignment between public and private sectors, the results never scale. Israel solved that problem, not by spending more, but by spending better and trusting the right actors. This is why today, despite its size, despite its location, despite its challenges, Israel stands among the most innovative countries in the world, outperforming nations with far more resources, far more stability, far more advantages, which leads to a final question. Could this model be replicated? Could other countries follow the same path? The answer is not simple, because copying the surface is easy, but replicating the system, the incentives, the culture, that's much harder. It requires discipline, long-term thinking, and the willingness to step back and let the right mechanisms work. Most countries struggle with that. They want control. They want quick results. They want political gains. But innovation doesn't respond to control. It responds to environments where ideas can grow. And that is the real lesson here. Because Israel's success is not about geography. It's not about luck. It's about decisions. Decisions made at the right time, in the middle of a crisis, when failure was a real possibility, and instead of collapsing, the country reinvented itself. So now the question is yours. If a country with no natural advantages, surrounded by instability, starting from economic chaos, could become a global innovation leader, what's stopping others? Is it resources? Or is it something deeper? Because sometimes the difference between failure and success is not what you have. It's what you choose to build.